Stannis Baratheon was the rightful king, and that is precisely the problem. He had the strongest legal claim to the Iron Throne. He was disciplined, consistent, and largely immune to the corruption that defined Westeros. In a world where ambition, deceit, and opportunism often determine outcomes, Stannis represented something rare, a ruler who believed in justice and fairness, but more importantly, in the authority of legitimacy itself. He is also portrayed as one of the most capable military commanders in Westeros. By conventional standard, he should have won. And yet, he loses everything. Not gradually, not ambiguously, but completely. He abandons his humanity, his army collapses, and he dies in the snow, defeated by an opponent who, by most measures, should not have beaten him. This is often explained as poor strategy, bad luck, or religious obsession, but those explanations are simply insufficient. They assume that something went wrong, but what if nothing went wrong? And what if Stannis fell not because he deviates from his principles, but because he follows them too consistently? Stannis does not fail despite his belief. He fails because he treats legitimacy as something that should guarantee power. The problem is not his belief in justice, it is that he believes legitimacy alone is enough. To understand Stannis, we must first take his worldview seriously. He does not act on impulse or emotion. His decisions follow a structured logic, one that appears almost formal in its clarity. First, he believes that justice is subjective. It is not shaped by circumstance or sympathy, but by rightful punishment. In this sense, justice functions to validate and stabilize legitimacy by signaling that rules are enforced consistently. This is most clearly demonstrated when he rewards Davos with knighthood, yet punishes him by cutting off the first joint of his fingers for past smuggling, even though that smuggling saved Storm's End during Robert's rebellion. Second, he assumes that legitimacy alone should determine rule, that it should translate into power. In this view, legality is not merely a principle, it is a mechanism that guarantees outcomes. From these assumptions emerges a simple conclusion. Legitimacy should produce power. This reasoning is internally consistent. It offers a world that is orderly, predictable, and coherent. It removes ambiguity and replaces it with structure. But it relies on fragile assumption that the world actually works this way. But the world he inhabits does not honor this. Eddard Stark holds lawful authority, yet is executed. The Red Wedding secures victory through betrayal. Ramsay Bolton prevails through opportunism and timing. These are not anomalies but the pattern, and it is this pattern that Stannis cannot accept. Reality does not cooperate. Stannis is the rightful king, yet he is losing. For most rulers, this is a setback. For Stannis, it is something more dangerous. It is a contradiction. If legitimacy guarantees rule, then defeat should be impossible. If defeat occurs, then something in the system must be wrong. At this point, Stannis faces a choice. He can accept that legitimacy does not guarantee rule, that outcomes are shaped by contingency, alliances, and forces beyond former claims. Or he can preserve his belief and force reality to conform to it. He chooses the latter. This is where Melisandre enters the story. She is often treated as a mystical anomaly, a corrupting influence from the outside. But this interpretation is misleading. Melisandre does not give Stannis power. She gives him certainty. She offers a world in which events are not random but meaningful, where victory is not contingent but destined, where Stannis is not merely rightful but chosen. This matters because it resolved his cognitive dissonance. If outcomes no longer align with legitimacy, they can be reinterpreted through divine will. failure is no longer evidence of a flawed assumption, but a sign that greater sacrifice is required. From this point on, Stannis does not adapt, he escalates. This escalation culminates in the sacrifice of his daughter, Shireen. This moment is often framed as madness, a sudden moral collapse, but it is better understood as the final attempt to restore coherence. If legitimacy guarantees rule, and divine will governs outcome, then anything demanded in service of that system becomes justified. This is not random cruelty, it is logical desperation. In preserving his worldview, Stannis abandons judgment. This is his moral death. What follows on the battlefield is merely its consequence. When Stannis marches against Ramsay Bolton, the outcome is already determined, not by military strength, but by his inability to revise his assumptions. If rightful claim must lead to victory, then defeat cannot be accepted. Retreat becomes unthinkable. Adaptation becomes impossible. Even doubt becomes a sign of weakening legitimacy. He had already lost the moment he could no longer accept losing. His defeat in the north is not a sudden failure of strategy. It is the final step in a process that had already begun. Stannis' tragedy becomes clearer when contrasted with Davos' seers. Davos, unlike his king, does not believe the world is inherently just. Having lived as a commoner, he understands that good men fail, that outcomes are often undeserved, and that survival depends on navigating reality rather than correcting it. This difference is not merely moral, it is structural. Because Davos accepts uncertainty, he can act within it. He can adapt, compromise, and remain humane without requiring the world to validate his beliefs. As explored in my previous video, his integrity functions not as idealism, but as a way of engaging with reality as it is. Stannis cannot do this. He does not fail because he is unjust or incapable. He fails because he cannot accept that legitimacy does not guarantee rule. This rigidity becomes cruelty. If legitimacy must produce power, any outcome must be justified. Suffering is explained away as deserved. Compassion becomes a liability. As reality resists, enforcement hardens, and judgment turns into justification. Such clarity comes at a cost. It eliminates compassion and replaces understanding with certainty. Stannis Baratheon is not destroyed by cruelty or incompetence. He is destroyed by his need for the world to make moral sense. Justice matters, but when legitimacy is treated as something that must always produce power, it stops being a principle and becomes a demand the world cannot satisfy. Stannis Baratheon died waiting for a debt that was never owed. To him, the world was a leisure. He believed that because his claim was just, his victory was a mathematical necessity. He didn't just want a throne, he expected it as a return on his investment in duty. We often share this delusion. We treat our hard work as a deposit and success as the interest we are entitled to collect. We assume that if we follow the rules, the world is obligated to reward us. We turn our integrity into collateral for a future that may never arrive. The Stannis is our warning. Justice is a compass, not a contract. It points the way, but it guarantees nothing. The moment we treat our principles as a currency for success, they stop being principles and become demands, and the world has no obligation to pay. The true cost of certainty is the inability to live in a reality that owes us nothing.